Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a very basic intro to immunology, so let's just dive right in. So in order to study immunology, we're going to first talk about our immune cells and their origin very briefly. So you might hear your professors call immune cells leukocytes. That's actually what we refer to all of our immune cells. They're called leukocytes. You might also see this written in papers. So just so you're not confused, this is basically the term for immune cells. And our immune cells derive from something called hematopoietic stem cells, or HSCs. Now, if you're entering your upper year courses in university, you might have been able to guess that, a cell might derive from a type of stem cell. And in this case, we call it the hematopoietic stem cell. That is what our leukocytes derive from, or they differentiate from. And so here we can see a very general picture here of a cluster of hematopoietic stem cells differentiating into various different leukocytes. So we have our macrophage, dendritic cells, etc., etc. And this is obviously a very simplified image here. I'll show you a actually detailed version of what I want to discuss today. So this is a really good breakdown of the differentiation of our hematopoietic stem cell and how the different steps that we see it goes through to become all of our immune cells in this diagram here. So we see that the stem cell is divided into two sort of major pathways here. We have the common myeloid progenitor pathway and the common lymphoid progenitor pathway as well. So I'm sure you might not have to remember everything about this diagram in your classes. You might have to simply just remember that your hematopoietic stem cell will separate off into two paths: common lymphoid progenitor, common myeloid progenitor, and then you will get into certain myeloid cells, as we'll see here, and certain lymphocytes. So that might be a little bit of a mouthful right now, but let's start with the left side over here. So actually, our common myeloid progenitor pathway, everything on this side of the diagram refers to cells of the innate immune system. So we'll get into that in a second. But we have our common myeloid progenitor that further differentiates down into the myeloblast, and we can form different types of cells here: neutrophils, basophils, eosinophils, monocytes, which further differentiate into macrophages. So all of these are part of the myeloid cell type. Now, if we look at the common lymphoid progenitor, we see that we can create natural killer cells, NK cells, as well as two different lymphocytes. So T lymphocyte, B lymphocyte. So lymphoid progenitor creates lymphocytes. Now, you might think, well, I know T and B cells, I've heard of that. That's essentially what we're referring to here: T lymphocyte, B lymphocyte. Those are going to become active T cells, active B cells. So you might hear that term as well, referring to T and B cells. And these two cell types, along with essentially everything that we see here in the lymphoid progenitor side, is going to be associated with adaptive immunity. So just a quick little brief description of that. Innate immunity essentially is the first line of defense in our immune system. When we are exposed to any type of pathogen, which is anything that will, cause illness or disease, if you will, we are going to first expose this pathogen to these cell types. This is what is going to encounter the pathogen first. It's going to be, macrophages are among the first line of defense. Everything here is what is considered part of our innate immune system. Okay, these are the cell types in the innate immune system. Now, with time, there are going to be other cells that get recruited to then properly take care of this infectious molecule, this pathogen, and that is going to be T cells and B cells. And there's a whole lot of details that go into when you recruit T cells and B cells and what happens when they're activated. but that is called adaptive immunity. So innate immunity is our first line of defense. This is what is going to, attack and sort of start up our immune response. These are the cells that are in the beginning stages. These are the frontline defenders, if you will. And our T and B lymphocytes are part of the adaptive immune system. These are going to come later. They're a lot more specific and specialized. So we've just established that there are different cell types that are involved in innate versus adaptive immunity, and they will kick in when their respective immune systems are called for. But there's also a really important detail to keep in mind here, and that is timing. So timing is really everything with the immune system, and this is something that is crucial to your basic knowledge of immunology, and you will likely get tested on this topic in your exams. So let's make sure we nail this information. So let's look at this graph here. We have time and our x-axis plotted by the total immune response. So we're going to look at what happens with our immune system when we are first exposed to some sort of microbe, something that will make us sick. So here, let's look on the left side. We have our first exposure to microbe X, and we can see, within the hours, our innate immune system is going to kick in. All those innate cells that we saw in the previous slide, the macrophages and whatnot, all those myeloid progenitors cell types are going to kick in our innate immune system. And they're going to begin to mount a response and work on, eliminating that microbe. And with time, we can see it once we cross into the days, late days, possibly even into weeks here where we're talking, we see an adaptive immune response begin to kick in. And so these are when our T or B cells, that's when they kick in, and they're going to dispose of this microbe accordingly. So we don't really need to get into those details in this video. We'll see that later. But that is the gist of what's going on here. Now let's say we get a second exposure to this microbe X. So immediately our innate immune system is going to kick in, as we assumed. We know this part already from what we've established so far. And we can see actually, after some hours, early into the days, we see our adaptive immunity will kick in. So this is coming in actually even earlier during our second exposure than during our first exposure, which is something I want you to pay attention to. And we can also see that the adaptive immune response actually makes up a large portion of this total immune response here. And this is during our second exposure of the microbe. So there's a couple things we want to take away from this. There's some conclusions we can make here. So what we can say is that upon exposure to this microbe, we don't really build memory of disposing of it with our innate immunity. As we can see here, the plot doesn't look different in our innate immune system. However, it does look different for the adaptive immune system. Here we can see that it kicks in much sooner upon second re-exposure. And we can see that it kicks into overdrive. It does it so much better. It will dispose of it quicker, faster, sooner, and better. So as we can see, it takes up a large portion of that total immune response. So we have memory that is being built with our adaptive immune response. So if you get re-exposure to something, immediately your immune system, it's obviously going to encounter the innate immune cells first. That is obvious. That's something we always expect. And immediately, the second our T or B cells of our adaptive immune system are recruited, they're going to recognize it immediately and know, okay, we're going to get rid of this. We know exactly how to get rid of this. And, we'll get into those detailed mechanisms in other videos. This is just the basics. So just a little recap and a couple little details about innate versus adaptive immunity. So we obviously said that innate immunity is our very first line of defense. It is therefore very broad. And it also includes barriers. So this could be physical barriers or chemical barriers. And an example of this is our skin. Our skin is the outermost barrier that is part of the innate immune system. It protects us from everything. And so that is part of the innate immune system. You might get a question on that, a little trick question about skin. It's part of the innate immune system. And we also know that we're not building memory. We're not building a memorable immune response with our innate immunity. It's going to, see the same microbe, see the same pathogen, virus, bacteria, whatever you want, and it'll see it as the same every time. It'll say, okay, let's recruit ourselves, let's try to get rid of it. But the adaptive immune system, we said it will develop with time. It's going to respond quicker, faster, and we have immunological memory. It's going to remember that it encountered that virus or that bacteria in particular, and it will get rid of it or dispose of it accordingly with our lymphocytes, our B and T cells, as well as antibodies. And that's not necessarily important for this video. We'll see more about that in future videos. Just know that antibodies are also part of this system here. And so we have, a little couple cell types that we can see. Macrophages, part of the innate immune system, and, T and B cells, part of the adaptive immune system. But the adaptive immune system can also be branched into humoral immunity and cell-mediated immunity. So this might be something you're going to cover in future lectures in class. So we'll cover this in a future video as well.